Great. Hey, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Sorry we're a couple minutes late, but I am your host, Doug Denny, the Director of Technical Marketing for our dedicated infrastructure business unit here at Rackspace. And I'm joined here with the guests of the Cloud Office Hours show, who I'll introduce here shortly, but we're going to walk through some topics around hybrid and cloud scaling here for the rest of the show. So just some real quick housekeeping. First, we typically host these deep dive hangout sessions on the second, third, and fourth Wednesday of every month. I will give you guys a heads up. We're going to be doing a little bit of a summer break for the deep dive program, at least for my portion of the deep dive program. As we move into conference season, I'm going to be out at Rackspace Solve in San Francisco later in mid-August, and then I'll be out at VMworld in late August, early September. And then I'll be at Microsoft Ignite in September as well. So I've just got a really busy schedule.
Rack up those frequent flyer miles.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but we will be back, and we will be broadcasting here and there. Just won't be at quite the regular cadence. Yeah. I think some of the folks from the other business units may continue to broadcast. So keep your eye on the deep dive program page. There's more to come. But again, in each session, we like to talk about real world topics geared for practitioner types. And those conversations usually involve things like reference architectures or reports or practical, tangible things that are derivative of the real world work that we do with our customers here day in and day out. Mm-hmm. And we like to make all of these assets available for viewers of the program right here in the page in which you're viewing this episode. Or if you happen to be watching through some other vehicle like YouTube, go to rackspace.com/deep dive, and you can get to the whole catalog of previous shows as well as the corresponding assets for those shows. And finally, if you happen to have questions, Mom, if you're watching live, use the Q&A app and we'll get to them at the end. Although we recognize that most people actually watch this on demand. So if you want to reach us with questions and get those questions to the experts that come on the show, email us at customercare@rackspace.com. which goes to me and my team, and then we'll pull in the right folks accordingly. So that's it for housekeeping. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests. First, we've got Alan Bush sitting right next to me. Hi, Alan. What do you do for Rackspace?
Well, I'm a community manager with Rackspace, so I try to amplify our Fanatical support beyond just a one-on-one customer interaction, right? So it's very similar to this type of thing that you've been doing here, and that really goes in vein with the things that Drew and I have been doing with broadcasting our support. I mean, what we try to do is we try to say every single interaction that a customer has with a racker is very valuable, but oftentimes those happen just in a one-on-one kind of a scenario. So what if we can find ways to share that through text tutorials, through video, through how-to guides, things like that. So we try to find ways to create that content and broadcast that out to people. So in addition to that, I've been hosting the Office Hours Hangout for the past 3.5 years or so. Now, yeah, with this guy here, Drew Cox, who I'm sure can now introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Drew Cox. I am a technical advisor for our enterprise space, and I basically help our enterprise customers with the cloud, make sure they are aware of our best practices, take advantage of our lessons learned, get the most out of our cloud offering. So I get pulled into new projects, concerns that come up, things like that, and I help make things run a little bit smoother.
Great, and it's good to have you guys. I've been a fan of the Cloud Office Hours series for a while. It, of course, was the inspiration for originally spinning up a similar type of program, originally to talk about dedicated infrastructure type issues. And so, again, any chance we have to have you guys come on the show is great. I would note, too, that we are here today to discuss the topic of scaling infrastructure based on common customer scenarios that we see. But it is an interesting fact that our job is really about scaling and amplifying the expertise that we have in Rackspace and taking that out to the world. So it seems appropriate that you guys are here.
Yeah, we'll scale all of the things, right?
Yeah, why not?
Whether it's our expertise or our infrastructure, we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I know we've got a lot of crossover from the audiences of the shows, but just explain to anyone who's new what the Cloud Office Hours program is.
It's somewhat similar to this, right? So it's our weekly panel show where we discuss topics mostly related to the cloud, but we're expanding. Now Rackspace is supporting several different clouds, right? So our public cloud, our private cloud, Microsoft's private cloud, Microsoft Azure's public cloud, Amazon Web Services. Right?
All the virtualizations,
right?
Anything that is built on top of dedicated, beyond just the hardware.
And we're pretty darn good at dedicated hosting as well.
We happen to be, and that's where Doug comes in. So this is a nice blend.
Yeah, it's it's very, yeah. Anyway, so we talk about stuff every Thursday at 1:00 Central Time. So set your calendar and we'll see you next time.
Hopefully valuable and insightful and intriguing and inspiring stuff.
Yep.
So
Well, it is.
we hope to be.
Mission accomplished.
Well, again, thanks for being here. And I'm going to give a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. First, I don't know how this is going to go. It might be a short show because we are kind of covering a popular topic that we have covered in the past. We're just bringing a different point of view to it, which is about, general topics of scaling infrastructure based on our experience with customers' growth. Right. So we have a lot of customers that come to Rackspace. They start small, they have a new project, and then we are successful together and their needs change and get more complex. So we want to talk about like the conditions under which that happens that we see commonly here. And then we're going to then walk through a couple architecture patterns, which might be familiar to folks because they're showcased on our website, but we're going to actually have a discussion about what they mean, right? You guys see out there shopping a lot of different diagrams and reference architectures, but to have the opportunity to sort of drill into why you start here and then go to there and then go to there is something that we don't always get a chance to share. And then finally, we're going to talk about all things Internet of Things. And I'm just making that up. I just wanted to see what you guys
get ready to Google something and see what comes up.
Always be ready.
Yeah.
Always be ready, like a Boy Scout.
But no, that's really about it. And we're not going to talk about Internet of Things. I just like saying that. Let's I guess go ahead and jump into the conversation.
Yeah.
So you guys have been around for a while. You guys have encountered and worked with a lot of customers that have fit this mold, right? They've started small with us and their needs have grown. Do you guys have any comments on like why does that happen? What are like common examples of like why a customer might start small with us and then, 6 months, year down the road, be calling us back to add capacity to their infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, I know, Drew, you're working with a lot of customers that are already pretty established and working on those. But, before you were in this enterprise technical advisor role, you and I were both in the cloud launch team role. And we were working with brand new customers, right? So within that first 60 days was most of the time we'd work with them. A lot of them were startups who were just starting small, and they would come to us with, hey, I've got this application that works on my laptop. Let's get that onto a cloud server so we can see if it even works remotely in development. Then we can start to develop it into a full-fledged scaled out application. So we've seen that quite a bit. I
think the flow cycling story is the one that really stands out as pretty indicative of customer growth. It might be pretty compressed. If we have a show where we interview, there's a couple of brothers that basically designed a less costly racing wheel for cyclists. And their story basically was we tried a really affordable solution that wasn't big enough for our needs. We bought a bigger solution that we had to pay for all the time, but we only really used on these short bursts. And then we discovered that that we could use the cloud and build out for our big events and shrink down for our small events. And then as they've continued to grow their brand, their needs have grown. And so the size of those servers that they build out to, or even the size of their steady state environment grows because they have more awareness in their market and they just have increasing needs. And so from the launch team perspective, we're dealing with people who come to Rackspace for the first time. Sometimes it's not their first hosting situation. It's, I was at a shared host where it was a platform and I needed more control. So I want to go to a place where I can get my hands on more stuff. And so they're coming from smaller or simpler or more rudimentary situations to Rackspace. And then that's a step on that process. We weren't a part of the first step or part of the second or third. And then we also have customers. I've been an account manager as well, where they're just growing. They have a big event. That's the fun story to talk about because it's that home run opportunity, the Shark Tank story, the we're on Oprah that also is a big driver of, we've been working really hard building momentum and we have this great opportunity that's going to put us into the next tier, move us to the next level of our business.
That makes sense. And that makes a ton of sense. And it's a very familiar pattern for us at Rackspace, specifically when you sort of look at like the startup type customers we've attracted in the past, or like the small companies or the SaaS. We have a lot of SaaS companies that have like built on various Rackspace platforms. And it's interesting. There's like kind of like, if you look at the arc from like, let's say there's a customer with like a 5-year arc with us. you know, early on in the first half of that arc, a lot of the Rackspace customer story is about building solutions that help them deal with the unknown.
Right.
Unknown events, they're going to drive traffic by some factor that is yet unquantifiable, right? And helping them deal with that, and because they don't want to miss opportunity. And then as they sort of mature in their market space, become a kind of establish their footing, and things become more predictable, then on the back half of that arc, it becomes, the story shifts a bit, and it's all about like, okay, how do we optimize our spend to maximize the profit? We don't want to overcorrect and leave money on the table by spending too much on infrastructure that we don't ever utilize. And so it's interesting. We have some customers that start with, for whatever their reason, they might start with a more traditional hosted, dedicated infrastructure environment and layer in and augment that with cloud to deal with unpredictability. And we have other customers that start with cloud. They maybe are more modern. Maybe they've just began life in more recent history. But then as they approach the back half of the arc, they start optimizing with dedicated infrastructure to manage costs in some parts of their application where they can see an economic advantage of doing so. But outside of like enterprise IT org stuff, which is a whole different sort of universe, everything else that we deal with almost always seems to some sort of fit into that mold somehow with just about every customer that we work with. So
I kind of think about the same story in my own life with the way I spend money on food. When I was in college, I didn't have any money, and I had a plan that I could go to the cafeteria and eat. And so it was covered and it wasn't very good. And then I graduated and I got a real paycheck, and I was like, I'm going out to eat every day forever. And I would let someone else do the cooking, and I would spend more money than I probably needed to. And now I'm potentially more mature adult who has a family to take care of, and there's some cost constraints. And so sometimes we go to the grocery store and load up the fridge and cook at home. And other times it makes more sense to eat out. But I take advantage of both of these options now that I'm more mature and adult, because I can, and it gets me the best of both worlds. There are days when I get home and I'm beat down, tired. I really don't want to get into the kitchen, so I'll pick something up on the way home. Helps out the wife. Everybody's happy. And there's other times when you can cook one thing and then use it again the next day and be really efficient with your spend that way. And you get the best of both worlds in that scenario. That's totally unrelated, but I think metaphorically similar to this. You can get the best of both worlds with a cloud environment that you can scale, and in a dedicated environment that you can own and tune. And together you're tailoring a solution that takes advantage of both.
Right. So if you're 20 years old, there's not a lot of sense in going out and buying, like, investing like $600 in a KitchenAid mixer.
Probably not.
Because your life is too chaotic for you to ever like realize that investment and
Certainly.
get some ROI on it. You're not going to be making like loaves of bread every weekend. You're going to be out drinking. Out. And but you know, in your late 30s or mid 30s, maybe later for some of you folks, that might actually start to like not only be fun to have, but like actually realize some sort of like
get the value out of
leverage,
it,
right? Because you're going to be at home, right? You know, and you're not dealing with that uncertainty in like your daily schedule like you do when you're in your early 20s. And I think that analogy absolutely holds true. And again, we see this in the maturity arc of our customers and their business, and sort of the as they build continuing amounts of historical data, from years past, like it becomes easier and more realistic for them to predict the future, right? And so again, that's where we start using these different tools that may not have made sense a year ago, but now they do.
Absolutely.
Right? So let's get into it a little bit. I want to walk through these architectures, which again are going to like melt anyone's brain. They're fairly standard, but one of the architectures we have in the downloadable asset, it's a progression of 3 slides, right? And this first slide shows a very common hybrid starting point, where, and in fact, this might even be more hybrid than a lot of customers begin their life with this, right? But we kind of rolled the clock forward a little bit here. We've got a dedicated Cisco ASA firewall, and we've got a physical single tenant dedicated database server. But then we have Rack Connect managing the network access control policy by way of the Cisco ASA firewall, and having the web and application tiers living in this instance our Rackspace public cloud. It's just really, we can do lots of things, but for the sake of the example, it's a little bit easier just to talk about our public cloud here. So this is a common architectural pattern we see where a customer has the rates of, when you look at like traffic demand patterns, right? The the relationship between database queries and web requests are not necessarily 1-to-1. Usually it's more like 5-to-1, 10-to-1, 20-to-1 in terms of like, a click on the web server versus how many calls to the database occur because of things like caching and all sorts of factors. So anyway, in this case, this is an architecture that makes a lot of sense when you've got, unpredictability for traffic, but you want to optimize the economics of your database. Sometimes due to like licensing reasons, right? You might save significant dollars on licensing by having that in a dedicated world. But also because generally, when it comes to operating an application that depends on like a relational SQL data store, predictability of performance is like really important, right? Because like you don't want the core of your data in terms of performance like shifting out from underneath you.
Right.
Yeah. And so this is again a very pragmatic starting point for customers that are just getting started, don't know what the future holds, but want to make sure that they're not dealing with like variable performance of the data tier at least, right? So,
well, I think this is a really good picture that kind of gives you a snapshot or a brief history. You can roll the clock back from here and look at a customer who may have had, just a firewall and a server that was doing everything. So they had a firewall in front so they could control access, and then that single server. And they start looking at maybe traffic spikes and saying, if we get another one that's a little bit bigger than this, we may have a problem. We should look at a solution that can take that into account. You can roll that web tier and that app tier off into the cloud through Rack Connect and make that make sense. Or you could see a situation on the other side where they start out in the cloud and they've got, a web tier and an app tier and a database tier, and they're in the situation that you're mentioning where this is a shared resource and usually it's fine, but we just had a situation where a little bit of degraded performance because of a noisy neighbor or whatever. I don't want my users to experience variability in the performance of my environment. I want to give them a consistent and ideal experience. Let's find a way to solve that problem. And then they deploy a dedicated database. So you could see either side of that Rack Connect dash wall being a starting point. And this is really that first step into, I've identified a spot where this isn't an ideal long-term solution for me. I want to take advantage of the other side. And then you roll out Rack Connect to start to get a best of both worlds scenario instead of kind of all my eggs in one basket.
You're getting and not an or situation. It also allows you to live on both sides of that equation, right? And gives you the flexibility to spin up when you need to burst into the cloud. I think we've got a couple of examples of that coming up a little bit later, more bursting scenario. But I mean, it's that Rack Connect that allows you that nexus point between the dedicated infrastructure and the cloud infrastructure that's more scalable and expandable.
That's a good point, because we talked about this a lot on past shows where we have customers that they're not necessarily operating cloud native apps. But they want to benefit from the cloud. And so, what do you do if you want to benefit from that? It's like a good example is a lot of the e-commerce platforms that we support. They have properties and subcomponents of the overall stack that benefit from the cloud, but they aren't intrinsically cloud native. Like a lot of them are powered by relational SQL data stores. And so when you think about that, like the web tiers are great because you can spin up more web nodes that are reading from a common data store without inheriting a lot of complexity. You kind of point them at the data store and you just make more of them and they sort of work, right? And and I'm oversimplifying, you got session management and all that stuff to deal with, but like generally it's easier than dealing with multi-node scenarios for relational databases. Things get a lot hairier, like what replication scheme do I have? Does my application use case support like the latency of asynchronous replication, like what all this stuff, right? And so a lot of customers choose to avoid that problem or delay it, right, by like scaling up on the data store side and scaling out on the web side if they're dealing with a non-cloud native app. This buys you some time to like figure out your strategy and maybe push off some of those really hard problems to a little bit later. Well,
and one of the other things that this hybrid approach, having cloud and dedicated, provides is with cloud, you can throw resources at something quickly, but you can't say, I want this proc, I want this amount of RAM, I want these speeds on my platters. Like all that stuff is already decided for you, and you can decide like I want this size of VM or this size of VM. I can't slice and dice to the same degree. And with that requirement around specific and repeatable performance for a database, you can really get into the nuts and bolts pretty far with a dedicated device that you can't do in the cloud. You can broadly affect that, but you can't get all the way down to those components. And if that's a requirement, or even if it's just a nice to have, it's available.
Yeah. Well, with the cloud thing, I would say that you can affect a certain amount of variability and customization, but it is in larger granules, right? It's not as finely granular control, right? And so it's kind of a scale of customization, right?
Yeah, it's a pre-sliced loaf of bread instead of a loaf of bread that you're going to cut up the way you want it to be.
Or a bakery.
Sure. Sure. That's a good example.
You can have your all of it. So your cake can eat it too, I guess was the pun.
If we're going to stay in the bakery vein, I think that works.
It's a fair. I mean, it's a fair point. It's sort of easy. Like when you live in the service provider world or the cloud provider side of the house, it's easy to be like, oh man, this customer is really beating me up over the fact that we don't have this like one random product that Intel makes. I'm like, Lord, is that really such a big deal? And like the answer is like kind of it kind of is, like, because outside of the service provider world, the customer has the entire universe of solutions at their fingertips, right? And they make decisions based on the availability of these things. And so, if they're operating them in their own data center, and if we want to compel them to make the choice to take that workload out of their data center and bring it to ours, we need to be able to offer the customization and the things that they have at their disposal outside of our data center. And so, the dedicated world does get us closer to being able to provide a level of customization for the band of customers that demand it, right? And again, not every app is cloud native, and so there's a lot of use cases where these things really matter. And dedicated is a big tool that we have in our arsenal to help meet those use cases that we couldn't otherwise meet without some sort of hybrid solution. So, wow, we've talked a lot more about this than I thought just on the slides one. So this is good. Let's go ahead and jump into the next pattern that we have here and talk a little bit more about that. And Alan, to your point, this was sort of this idea of cloud bursting, not necessarily from your data center to ours, that mythical holy grail, but more from like a physical footprint into a cloud footprint to deal with, variable traffic situations. So what I see here is, we're using Rack Connect, using dedicated firewall. But this time, instead of an ASA firewall being sort of the terminating appliance between the physical and the cloud networking universe, we instead have, in this case, an F5 big IP load balancer. And that device is doing more than just being that bridge. It's also making intelligent routing decisions like layer 7 load balancing decisions. Can you give me some insight into like what that might mean and what we're viewing here, where we've got physical and
I mean, the thing that comes to mind, and you alluded to it just a little bit earlier, was kind of the e-commerce solution. And I believe last week's show deep dive was on holiday scaling, right? Like getting ready for that big thing. That's always something. Here it is. It's not even August yet, but we're already talking about getting ready for Black Friday, and we should probably get our annual Black Friday programming ready to go. But it's something that you should be thinking about, and figuring that out. The scenario that I see here is where you have a business that does a pretty good business all year long, but you want to have a sale that comes up. And so instead of provisioning more servers, which by the way, we're getting a lot faster at and a lot better at doing that quickly, but you don't need to have them online for an entire year or 2 year long contract. You just want to scale up for the term of a sale and then bring that back down. You might want to do that, and have that bursting into the cloud ability. That's kind of what I see as that primary.
Yeah, I mean, you think of like the flower sales analogy, just to not beat the Black Friday analogy completely into the ground. Outside of like Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, their requirements aren't massive. I mean, there's always birthdays and anniversaries and things like that, but everybody gets flowers on Valentine's Day and Mother's Day if you happen to have a Valentine or be a mother or have a mother. So there's a lot of that going on. Most people, it's pretty often. But for those stretches, those sorts of businesses really need to be robust, because they're not the only game in town. There's a handful of e-tail options for sending flowers to your person that you love. And you have to be available, because if you're not, they're just going to go to the next one. And so you need to be rock solid in those situations. But if you spent the money to be that way all the time, you'd go broke in the middle of the summer when, the May weddings are over and you're kind of waiting out what happens next. That's not a good position to be in, to be shelling out that kind of money for really low returns. You want to shell out the money when the returns are high,
right?
And you don't want to own it all in the middle of those deserts when people aren't going to be buying at that scale. So to be able to take advantage of it temporarily and in a trustworthy manner, you don't have to worry, am I going to handle it or not? That is crucial for all businesses. Everyone has that kind of a window, even if it's self-inflicted, even if it's like Amazon saying, it's Amazon deal day. They artificially drive a bunch of traffic to their website for cash flow reasons, I'm sure, but they're not able to do that just because they own all the things all the time. They leverage what they need for that period of time, and then they shift into other uses of that compute outside of that. But having the ability to do both, to burst into the cloud in those moments, is that rent the spike bursting situation that really becomes valuable when you're not having to shell out money, when you're not making the money.
Buy the base, rent the spike.
That's the story. You've heard it before, but this is a really great way of doing that when you can have a tightly tuned and tailored solution that does what you need to do day in and day out. And then when opportunity comes to really hit a couple of big moments out of the park, it's at your fingertips. You can take advantage of it, and your expenses drop the minute your opportunity is over.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you mentioned, you don't mind paying that money when your return is there. I would argue that you have to pay that money for the spike when that return.
If you want another spike in the future, right, I recommend it. Yeah.
And we've unfortunately seen, in fact, that's why our cloud launch team that we're both founding members of, that's why it was created, is because we saw that happen. Mm-hmm. That near opportunity that
success failure is the saddest situation to be a part of.
It is. And we started off the show talking about our friends at Flow Cycling, and that was, they came to us, and one of their first conversations was, we don't think we can keep doing this. We want to do this, but it just doesn't seem to be possible.
Our credibility is on the line,
right?
And that's something you can't really risk. Exactly. You need your credibility if you're going to continue to do business.
Yep.
I want to zero in a bit on the Rack Connect component of this, because we all know that Rack Connect, at least in the rack space world, is sort of the glue that bridges these two universes. And the point I want to make is that you, in theory, could achieve this outcome without Rack Connect, right? You could have dedicated infrastructure. You could spin up public cloud, but the instances as well. And you could find a way to sort of then glue this all together and orchestrate the dispersal of traffic across all these nodes, right? Web and app tiers. But the value of Rack Connect is that we take a bunch of networking voodoo and we apply a bunch of automation so that you don't have to go build your own.
And you don't have to go out to the public internet.
Right. And that whole piece too, you don't have to do this all over the public internet. You don't have to have your server to
transactions and any of that
traffic
stuff
traversing the public internet. But this is important, right? Because if you were to go do this on your own, let's say you had a colo and you wanted to do something similar with Amazon, you absolutely can achieve this, right? But you have to think that so whenever we spin up a new node in the cloud as part of a group, that automatically gets the rules are automatically added through Rack Connect to the F5 load balancer that makes it aware of and begin routing traffic intelligently, right? And that's all sort of Rackspace IP that I don't think we often really tout enough, because it takes a lot of the pain out of doing this. And we sort of baked in our own best practices for managing traffic that spans the dedicated and multi-tenant universe into the product so that customers don't have to go figure all this stuff out themselves.
I have an uncle who is a race car driver type, and he built his own hot rod.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. And I like riding around in it. I'm not going to build my own hot rod. Yeah. I'm going to trust an automaker that does auto making as their core competency and provides a repeatable and trustworthy vehicle for me to buy and use.
Yeah. You'll drive it on the weekends for fun, but you're not gonna put your family in it.
No, absolutely not. No, it's awesome, but it's a bunch of pipes and such as your security. And if you drive it safely, it's fine. I happen to not have a car that I built myself because I don't trust myself, and it's just a lot better for me to trust my family in something that's a safe and repeatable thing built by an expert. And that's what you have here at Rackspace, is you have people who have done this over and over and over again. We have a NetSec team that's got tons and tons of experience seeing a lot of people doing a lot of things, and they can help get you to market much faster than a self-built product. And you can still have a lot of control and input in that conversation. And I would much rather take the expert opinion of Ford or Toyota or whoever in building a car than trusting myself to follow a kit perfectly and then putting my kids in the car seat and seeing how it goes.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned the expertise in building things out, and I mean, if you look at the history of Rackspace, right? Rack Connect has only been around for 3 or 4 years, right? So
4, I think,
we've taken our first 10 plus years of existing and figuring out the networking and really becoming experts in networking for our customers and
the relationships with people like Cisco and F5
right.
and
Absolutely.
those organizations.
Absolutely. And then if you want to get into it even further, I mean, the other option that you are now able to tap into with a more dedicated environment is some of the security settings that are there that are only available with the dedicated gear.
Right.
You can
throw IDS in front and all sorts of other
you can throw in all types of physical hardware, and then you can even throw on a managed security layer on top of that, which Rackspace does have as well. So and again, we're leveraging the expertise that we've built
and
up,
experience,
and the experience that we have and the relationships that we have with all the vendors. So yeah, I mean, you can add all of that together and stack it up and scale your entire protection and your whole stack.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, right. Like in the pure cloud universe, we can't start allowing customers low-level access to like cloud control plane constructs like virtual switches, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's the nature of these things. You can't have nice things that come in the cloud and give people low-level access. It's the compromise that you make. But in the dedicated world of the hybrid architecture, we can give you low-level access to a switch to do things like port mirroring, to have an IDS and let it do its job, right? And again, we covered that at length in one of the early deep dive shows. But again, it's a pretty compelling argument for hybrid architectures for security sensitive workloads is we can make those exceptions in the dedicated universe, right? And so again, this is all driving home this idea that like if you have a non-cloud native app, if you have workloads that don't quite perfectly fit into the sweet spot for multi-tenant infrastructure, you don't necessarily have to go guardrail to guardrail and swing all the way to like a dedicated environment. Usually the answer is somewhere in the middle, and we give you the ability to sort of find that middle ground and fine tune it across those universes.
Yeah, and you can still have virtualization on dedicated. I mean, we offer a boatload of different types of virtualization. You can even be on OpenStack in a private cloud environment that bursts into the OpenStack structured public cloud environment. So you can still get those virtualization tools in a mostly dedicated environment that still takes advantage of that rentable spike opportunity. So, bare metal is valuable. You can virtualize on top of it and stay in single tenancy and then burst into that multi-tenancy and have that, guardrail to guardrail full suite of tools.
Right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So this is a good point. It's a good segue into the third and final architecture of the sequence here, which kind of does exactly that. There's some dedicated bare metal servers, right? And we're here in the physical world. There's a private cloud. Pick your flavor. That could be OpenStack or Microsoft Cloud Platform or VMware. SAN storage, right? But then on the other side of the DMARC, we've got multi-tenant cloud apps. And so in the universe that I came from, before I got into this role, I was in solution architecture with a focus on enterprise accounts and trying to get them to move stuff to the cloud. And one of the most common inhibitors to replacement of workloads for these enterprises in the cloud was the fact that a lot of these apps didn't run in a vacuum. They had dependencies on other back office apps that lived in a data center. And it was time and time again, the objection was like, we've got this sort of like user-facing portal that would benefit from the cloud, but like all of our data lives on like a NetApp, and it all feeds into this VMware infrastructure that a lot of our back office and like data warehousing stuff lives on, and we can't just like place these two things like 1,000 miles apart. And so a couple of things are happening out in the world. Like one, we've got like virtual networking technology that can like sort of logically extend networks, but that doesn't necessarily deal with like the physical, like the physics problem.
Right.
Right. And then we've got things that we offer now to sort of like even erode at that even more, like a Rack Connect Global to make your data center closer to ours over dedicated circuits, right? To connect cloud exchange. And that helps. But like oftentimes what ultimately made more sense was like, okay, well, what are your dependent applications? And like, let's take those two, but we're going to put them on more traditional infrastructure, like a more traditional VMware-based private cloud in our data center. We're going to give you the benefits of like the agile service provider-based delivery model. So we can even, we can't transform your business apps into the cloud, but we can sure make it a whole lot faster to manage change there. And then finally, your cloud API can run in the cloud now, and they can connect over Rack Connect, right? And so this last iteration you see could represent a couple things. It could represent that sort of classic enterprise problem where dependencies just have to be dealt with by putting everything that's dependent in the same local data center. Or it could represent the SaaS company problem where we have to optimize. We're at a more mature part in our journey, and we're going to take pieces of the workload that can be optimized and have better economics on a dedicated infrastructure, whether that be virtual or bare metal. But we've got other pieces that still make the most sense in the public cloud, and sometimes it looks like this, right? So, sorry, man, I've been talking a long time. But one of the key things that stands out to me in this architecture is that we've got things like SAN storage, right? So maybe a customer has gotten to a point where they have multi-node database requirements. They need things like clustering because they need high availability for the data tier, right? We can offer like low latency fiber channel connected SAN to these applications in the dedicated universe with more predictable performance that we can offer than any public cloud can offer, right, for data stores. And of course, we're doing something else interesting here too. We're looking beyond just sort of like compute services in our public cloud. We're starting to get into other like second order, third order services, like in this case, cloud files.
Yeah.
What other like services do we see customers consume in the cloud on the cloud side of the equation as their needs get more advanced?
I think block storage is a big part of it. It kind of fits into that compute conversation just because we have boot from volume options and a lot of the more tailored optimized flavors.
Okay.
But then we also have that further blending of these two components by bringing up something like on metal. And so with on metal, you've got no hype. It's just the server and the resource bare right there. You can do anything with it. And so you start looking at what you can do to deploy very quickly additional bare metal resources into a hybrid environment where you're already depending on bare metal for some other things, but getting new devices stood up may take a little bit more time. When an API available piece of hardware can just be stood up and accessed at the touch of a button, you start seeing a lot more interesting things being tested and then eventually rolled out as features and products.
That makes sense. We talked to a customer a while back that had sort of a high performance compute use case where it was a large insurance company, and they run these batches of analysis that what are they using? They're using a Microsoft specific, I think it's like a Microsoft HPC, and they had like requirements for CPU that were generally above and beyond what they could get from the public cloud portfolio. And so they were interested in both. I have brought this up before. We were definitely recycling content. Windows wasn't available at OnMetal at the time, so they were looking to dedicated infrastructure and a rapid deploy, and some of the rapid deploy options we had to like help them achieve that goal. But the reason was when they needed compute, they needed it fast, and they didn't need it forever. And they're ultimately most interested in our evolution and roadmap for OnMetal because that would be great for them.
Yeah,
they could get everything they needed on bare metal, have it instantly within minutes, and then spin it down when they were done. And that's a great use case because ultimately this data that they were deriving and synthesizing would still get pushed out to a lot of their agents in terms of like the tools they used to do the job over an app that was like cloudy.
Yeah.
But the crunching of that data was not necessarily like a great cloud problem, right? So,
right.
And here you have an example of that interplay between like where bare metal makes a ton of sense, enables a cloud user experience, but the whole thing isn't necessarily like a viable all in the cloud. So
right, and you look at their options, and it was own the infrastructure that could do the work, but you're only asking it to do the work every once in a while,
which is what they do today, right?
which is required by their, because of what they need to do. That's the option that they have,
right?
And so it's painful to be paying for it when you're not running that process. But if you are able to deploy that on Metal, then you're saving the money when you're not running it. The other option, I mean, you can run it slower on something that's not as beefy, but then you can't deliver as quickly. And then you have some situations where you can even offer the same. Maybe we back out of this specific situation, but if you can do the same thing by the end of next week or within 24 hours, you can charge a premium for that faster delivery time. You don't care which one the customer picks because you can deliver either one, but you can add a premium that really makes your portfolio a little bit more compelling and brings in more money. And so you start looking at your options when you see all of this portfolio brought together under one solution, and it can start opening up business discussions that weren't possible beforehand.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. All this stuff ultimately manifests itself as like things that you might be able to do for your own customers that you previously like required too much effort or engineering to achieve. So you just sort of like left those ideas in the parking lot, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of these technologies like are opening the door. Again, I mean, the biggest one, right, is like, how do I make my non-cloud native app benefit from the cloud? That is the biggest problem that hybrid solves, is like, you know, how do I benefit from some of those agility, knowing that, again, this is never going to be like Netflix, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't benefit at all.
Sure.
You know, I can't get some utility out of the cloud, and hybrid is really like at the core of like enabling that whole universe of apps that are going to still be around for a while.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going anywhere. So,
they were built because they're useful, and they're still being used because they serve a purpose.
Right.
So when they stop serving a purpose, we may not see them again, but you have that data gravity of, you know, I've already been working within this construct for this amount of time. It's going to be really painful to pivot out of it. So how can I continue without that pain, but take advantage of these other tools and other opportunities? And that's where I think this whole conversation, and the times that we've talked about it on our show and on your show, it's going to continue to come up because there's going to be value in new technologies. We're not talking about the technologies we'll be talking about next year on our show. And these technologies will have a value. They won't be developed unless they do.
Right.
But these technologies that we've also been talking about for the last 2 or 3 years and on the history of your show aren't going to quit being valuable all of a sudden.
Right.
And without having to go through all the pain, you still can take advantage of the new stuff as it comes along while continuing to deliver additional value from the traditional approach.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, we're at about 45 past the hour, and I think if we were to try and stretch this out anymore, we'd just be boring our audience. But I appreciate you guys joining. I guess it was a really good conversation. And it's good getting y'all's perspective, because we've seen a lot of different perspective from all across the business, from different folks that we bring onto the show. But you guys, again, get to like aggregate these experiences and talk to a ton of different people in the course of making your show. So getting your insight and bringing that to our show is really, really appreciated. So thanks again for
absolutely.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, you bet. Before we leave, any parting thoughts or comments you guys want to make? Put you on the spot one last time.
I think that
Internet of Things, please.
Yeah. Okay. So when your toaster is connected, I think the big thing that we've been talking about this whole time is this nexus point of Rack Connect, and it's one of those things that you can actually get into for a fairly modest price, but that single nexus point will allow you to expand out in the future, and so that's one of those things that is, you know, potentially very attractive. It's something that you can talk to an account manager about and figure out if it's right for you. And that's one thing that I really need to keep in mind, is that is, we're here. You know, we have years and years and years of expertise and experience working with customers that have solved a lot of the same problems that you have, or you know, are finding new ways to present us with problems, right? And in the nicest sense of the word. But there's plenty of different ways that we can, you know, help you look at this. So get in touch with us, and we'd be more than happy to sit down and talk for an extended period of time and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think the three examples that we looked at for this show are very much broad, that they're not tailored. And the value of having a portfolio as broad as we have is that if you have that conversation, if you say, hey, hey, account manager, hey, BDC, let's talk about my requirements moving forward or some of the pain points that I've run into. That conversation is going to start tailoring down into your specific solution, not one of these kind of broad cookie cutter options. These are great to kind of spark an idea and begin the conversation and the thought process that will end in a finely tailored solution that can cover some of the gaps you currently have and provide value where you're not able to deliver it now. So all of what we talk about really is delivering the expertise that we have through the experience that we've garnered working with customers, dealing with their various concerns, problems, and projects, and then taking those lessons learned and paving potholes that you would have hit had you done it on your own, and making that path smoother and more attractive. It's going to take work, but a lot less than it would going it alone. And so we offer all of these tools because we've got experience, we've seen it work, and the offerings that we have are the amalgamation of all of that experience. And next year it's going to be better than it is this year, and the year after that it's going to be better than it was next year. So we continue to build on top of it, and you get to be a part of that and reap those benefits without having to go through every single painful experience that has led to where we are now.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to our viewers for taking the time out of your day to watch our show. As always, all of the assets that we discuss in the show are available at rackspace.com/deep dive. And from that page, you can also check out the schedule for future sessions, review and browse through the old sessions. And there's social buttons there so you can share these with your friends if you like it, or reach us and give us feedback if there's something we can do better on the show. By all means, we love hearing from folks because we want to make this valuable for you as well. So thanks again so much. We'll see you next time.
Hi, everybody.